So today I'm here to talk about scaling up AI solutions, going from prototypes and pilots to enterprise-wide deployment. I'm going to talk to you some of the common pitfalls that I see, and as we go through the talk about how to address those in time. I speak all over the world about AI, and I speak to a lot of companies in the course of my day-to-day work. And hopefully we'll have a few minutes for Q&A at the end. So please do add any questions into the comments, and Karen will bring them to my attention. So I'll start with a little bit about me. So until recently, I was the Chief AI Officer at Informa, which is the largest conference company in the world. And I was also the Chief Technology and Product Officer for a £400 million division in that organization. So I got to work at the intersection of business and technology for many, many years across different organizations. And the idea today really is that it's not to talk about anything academic or theoretical. The idea is like this is all born out of real work that I've done myself in the course of the last few works working around data and AI and technology with different companies. And I want everybody to leave the session here today with a much better sense practically about what organizations need to do to go from either pilots and prototyping all the way up to scaling out more broadly across their organization. So I thought we'll start off with just some of the key challenges. And these are ones that I have seen time and time again with different types of organizations, commercial organizations, public organizations, charities, etc., small, medium, and large, all the way through really, really common patterns. And as we go through the session, you'll see that there's strategies for mitigating some of these to avoid some of these pitfalls. So I'll just step through them briefly. And I'm sure some of the people here on the call will be familiar with some of the patterns that we're talking about here. Not having leadership, and by that I mean like not having a single accountable owner for AI inside an organization. There being a lack of strategic focus, there a lack of coherence, and pilots just happening everywhere. And this quite often happens in organizations where there's lots of entrepreneurial individuals across an entire company, and they're just doing stuff with tools that they're not approved, they're not recognized, and they're making a lot of progress, but it's just not joined up. The second pattern I'm seeing is where companies, they believe that they need to sort out all the underlying data foundations before introducing AI. For years, companies have been told that they need to fix their data foundations. It's expensive, it's hard to do, and it's time consuming. And it's not true that you need to sort out all of your data foundations to actually get moving and make some material progress with AI. The third pattern then is around CEOs not having a clear line of sight of where they'll get return investment from investing in AI, and therefore they don't. They're just kind of waiting to see what the competition is doing, see what the market's doing, see if AI is just a bit of a hype essentially. And then the fourth pattern is organizations that solely focus on the technology. And this is problematic because it quite often is disconnected from the leadership. The leadership team don't recognize that they're actually accountable for deciding what the priorities are and what should be gone after. And then sometimes there's no AI literacy or responsible AI programs to support any AI transformation. And all those things rolled together just create numerous problems, and they tend to lead to failure and poor investment return. The fifth pattern then is around where AI is just bolted onto existing workflows, and workflows not being redesigned from the ground up with agentic AI in mind. And again, this is problematic because usually organizations have got suboptimal workflows in the workplace, and therefore just bolting on AI to something that isn't really that functional anyway is not for the long term going to be something that scales up. And then the last one is like essentially just finding it hard to scale up from pilots. And this includes issues around people, process, technology, and governance. And the reality is that going to prototype stage or even pilot stage inside organizations with AI, it's very straightforward. It's not difficult to do at all. It's when you try to scale that up that things get really, really difficult, very hard. It's just exponentially harder to deliver deployments at scale globally rather than just be a pilot and prototype scale, because everything's got to be ready. The technology, the governance, the people essentially, and the processes and change management and communications, all those things need to work harmoniously and coherently. So all these patterns, you'll see them ripple through the talk as we go through it now. So first of all, I'm just going to start at a really kind of simple level. So AI adoption is stale. At its most simple level, it requires a measured and strategic approach, which is mostly common sense. First of all, don't wait to get started. If there's people here inside organizations that have not begun AI for whatever reason, it's worth just getting started. Identify relevant use cases for specific audiences, and those could be internal and external, or one or the other, to help deliver specific outcomes. And then work out how to achieve it. It can be done iteratively. You don't need all the answers. You certainly don't need a 100-page AI strategy deck before you get going. And if you have an organization, if you're inside an organization with a technology and a product team, ask them to help you figure out how to get started in a coherent manner. Don't just leave it to an individual or CTO or something like that, or leaving it to the organization just to organically get across this. It should be a mixture of top down and bottom up. Educate yourself. If you haven't done so already, learn about the risks and the pitfalls, and there are many. And conferences like this really help with education and learning about what's out there and learning what the market is doing. The space is moving really quickly and it'll continue to do so. So it's a case whereby it's not learn things once and then move on. It will be continuous learning for yourself and your teams. And AI for its own sake, it'll be ineffective. AI that supports an organization's established goals and its strategy, it's much better and it's much easier in the longer term to integrate that more fully, and it's more likely to be successful. And it's also important not to be too risk averse, because the reality is that some risks need to be taken, but the risks need to be understood. Mitigation need to be considered, and the blast radius can be planned so that there's an acknowledgement of what the blast radius could be if things don't go quite right, and you can adjust that as time goes on. And there is another misconception whereby organizations sometimes believe you need a huge internal tech team or to pay consultancies a lot of things to make things happen. That isn't true at all. You do need to have reasonable data and a group of people that understand how to do product development in a customer-centric way, and people that are interested in just getting things going. But having people joined up together and not just fighting the good fight alone is really important. And then the last element is around shadow AI. Be cognizant of the fact that inside whatever size organization you're working in today, there will be many people, if not all people, using different AI tools. Most of them won't be approved or recognized by your wider organization. It is just a reality. And when you think of that, you begin to recognize that you need to provide guardrails to allow people to experiment and make clear about what is allowed or what isn't allowed, and ensure that there's appropriate governance to make sure that the tools that they're using, there's an awareness of what's being used. Because if you don't understand what's being used, you don't know what information is being put into training models that are freely available for other people. And lastly, focus on the positives and not the negatives when it comes down to change management and communications. AI can be a real force for good inside organizations, so it's important to get the communications right. I thought it was worth putting this slide up just to talk a little bit about where organizations are investing in AI because they're seeing a return. Now, this slide is from McKinsey. Their survey is from McKinsey, and this is across several thousand organizations in America from around about the middle of last year. And you'll see the circles there are up around sales, marketing, product and R&D, and customer operations. And those are actually all the areas that I went after inside Informa, because I felt that there's going to be real measurable business outcomes from every single one of those areas. And it's interesting to see that that's where a lot of companies are going after, because they're pretty obvious areas. They're pretty binary essentially. And the more binary and things the black and white organizations are in terms of functions, the easier it is to achieve an ROI. Now, so this survey is across several thousand companies, and it's essentially showing how much is being invested into particular functions and where they're seeing an ROI. I thought it's just worth flashing up what can generative AI help with. Now, this visual, this is representative of a number of different industries. On the left-hand side, you'll see just a selection of different use case themes, we'll call them, in relation to the customer, which is say outside B2B or B2C. And then on the right-hand side, they're more internal. And then in the middle circle, they're more a bit of a mix between the two. And frankly, generative AI, there are so many different use cases where it can really make a dramatic difference, a material difference inside organizations. These are just examples. Depending on the industry, it can get really specific, but sometimes it's much easier to get an ROI from use cases that are tried and tested across different companies. So you can certainly learn from others rather than going alone and hoping for the best. Going to get into some of the practicals now. Now, this is a strategic framework. I'm going to go through this at a really high level, but the aim being is to give you an overview about what are the steps you need to take in order to drive AI adoption in a strategic sense across your organization. Now, there's a bunch of detail behind this framework, and I'll be very happy to share it to anybody in the call that they would, if they would like to have that after, and I will be happy to share offline. But the aim here, you'll see, is to go through each of the steps. So I'm just going to briefly talk through these. Now, even though it's shown as a road, in essence, this is layers. You'll go through every single one of those steps, and then at a high level, and then you'll go back over it, and you keep layering it over time rather than going through every single part at every single stage. So we'll just go to this briefly. So setting the objectives from the outset. This is where you're really just being really high level. You're looking at the company's strategy, the company's vision, the company's mission, and you're getting a sense of relation what should you go after. Now, in all the work that I've done over the last years in AI and data, largely these break down into two broad areas. One is an internal goal, and that could be an AI objective around productivity. And the reason that people go after productivity is because if you can increase your productivity, you will improve your operating profit margin, and that is good for an organization. Usually, then there is also a corresponding external goal. I certainly recommend this, and this is where if you have external customers, usually or often it goes down to improving the customer experience. Because if you can improve the customer experience, you're likely to have those customers come back and possibly spend more money with you. So ultimately, the aim here is to drive revenue growth. So the two goals being often around operating profit and revenue, and they can sit well together. And then you need to start getting people involved in this. Not many people need to be involved in defining those objectives. You can do that pretty quickly. And it's at this point you get people involved. When you get into building a rich picture, this is when you start getting really specific. What does it actually mean? If you have your top level goals, which are mapped to your business strategy, what are the things you should go after? And this is when you start getting into really specific areas. If you decide to go after marketing and sales, well, what kind of marketers do you have? What kind of salespeople do you have? Again, what kind of specific roles do they have? Is it a sales leader? Is it a sales account manager? Is it a marketing director? Is it a CMO? The more that you know about you breaking out your personas, the better you'll be at being able to get an understanding about what their real pain points are. So a lot of this is about research. And then you're getting into specific objectives for helping those problems to be solved by those individuals. When it comes inside, then you start thinking about, well, what technical capabilities do you have? What data do you have? What kind of integrations do you have? And this starts mixing in number two, which is building in the rich picture, with number three and number four, when they are start working harmoniously together. Because once you have a view of the key pain points and the things that will really make them a difference either to your customers or to your internal employees, then you start getting a sense of what use cases to go after. And again, being really, really specific about what those use cases are, why you'd solve them, how you know it's been solved really well, how you would measure these use cases, and what the success criteria are. Then you start getting into what data have you got? Do you own the data? Have you got access to it? If you haven't got enough data, where else are you going to get it? Is the data usable? And the architectural approach. If you have an internal technology team, you can start getting a sense of, are you able to add something on already? Is there something that's already been used that you can extend? And the buy versus build versus hybrid approach, this is a conversation that it's not a one conversation with technology teams and executives. It's an ongoing conversation because the reality is, even in a small organization, they're not just going to have one AI tool. In large organizations, they'll end up in hundreds or thousands because every modern application is going to have AI capabilities built into it. And there is a necessity to have those orchestrated and joined up. So there's an understanding of what's flowing in, who's got access to the thing, and what's going out of it, essentially. So that there's complete transparency and accountability the whole way through. Once you've done these levels, then you start getting into building a plan. And it's great to have big ambition, but starting small is really important. Change enablement cannot be underestimated. Change management and communication, there is a significant amount, and it's ongoing. This falls into the area of AI literacy. But by starting small, you enable yourself to set small goals to be able to be more chance of having success and then expanding. I'll go back to the word I used a while ago around blast radius, making the blast radius really small. Because if something comes out from your company and it is public and it represents things poorly or incorrectly, that can really, really damage a brand. Coming up with the deployment approach, this is when you're coming into different waves of deployment. Usually you start with prototype, pilot, and then going up to scale. And then reviewing your plan. And this is like making sure that you have your data privacy plans, your governance plans, your legal plans, your communication plans, and making sure you're really clear about how we're going to measure success. And by that, I mean having baseline data. So it's clear what your starting point is. So it's very clear in terms of are things going right, are things going bad, and then building in your feedback loops. Because if you have feedback loops, then it's possible to improve and iterate what you're doing. And feedback loops are relevant for internal use cases as well as external use cases. And then lastly, measuring and magnifying. You go big on the things that are working and you dial down and change the things that aren't working. And you talk about it. You make sure that you are being open, transparent, and just really clear about what you're actually using for. And if you're doing external use cases, telling your customers what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that they're on board with you and there's a full sense of transparency, which helps to build trust. I'm going to talk a little bit about responsible AI because sometimes I talk to people and they're not quite clear what this means. So this is just a top level view. So responsible AI, it's almost an umbrella term for things including ethical AI, which is around looking at things such as bias, fairness, transparency, and accountability. And from the outset, really thinking about what does responsible AI mean for your organization and putting in a framework to people to operate in. And by providing clarity and understanding around what stance is your organization taking in relation to responsible AI, it can start to fitting into some of your values around AI. Bias mitigation, again, it kind of starts with understanding about, well, what does bias mean in relation to your organization and how are you going to go about mitigating that? Privacy and security, it's a real problem. And leaning into this from the outset is going to help to mitigate problems for your organization. I'm sure everybody in this call is very familiar with the term human in the loop. That's critically important and it will continue to be for many, many years to come. And this is when you make sure that you have oversight at the right point in time to make sure that there's quality control measures the whole way through. AI governance also intersects with responsible AI, and this when it gets into more the mechanics of things, such as I said a few moments ago, around who's got access to data, what applications have got AI capabilities, have they been approved, have they been acknowledged and recognized, are we really clear about who's allowed to use them, and so on. Now, AI literacy and managing change, this is another area where sometimes companies struggle because they're not quite clear where to start. Embracing learning at every single level, and by this I mean at the board level all the way down to the works of the coalface. This is really, really important. It should become integrated into everybody's working life, not on day one, but over time, where it ends up in competency frameworks, job specifications, and there's an expectation that AI tooling will be used to help your organization. And it's important that the leaders walk the walk as well. So if the executives inside an organization are saying that a particular set of AI tools must be used, they should be seen to use them too. Otherwise, it rings hollow. It brings a lot more authenticity and helps to build trust if leaders are walking the walk. I talked a while ago about encouraging exploration. And that's once there are clear guardrails put in place about, well, what tools are people allowed to use, what sandboxes are in play, and what does experimentation really mean? And making sure that there are forums for people to share their learnings and to basically say, well, this worked really well, or this didn't actually work that badly, so that everybody feels like they have vested interest in getting involved in this, and it kind of takes away some of the fear, we'll say. Open dialogue kind of cuts to all of this, and just to emphasize, like walking the walk is true even at a managerial level, the whole way across an organization. It's got to be authentic. Clear communication. This should include the good things, the highlights, and the lowlights, essentially, because it is incredibly hard to change behaviors, even very, very minute changes to everyday workflows. It should not be underestimated how much time needs to be given and how much thought needs to be given. People are not homogenous groupings inside organizations. Every single individual will be in a different place in regards to their thoughts, their feelings, their perspectives about AI and what it means for them and for their role. And as leaders inside your organizations, you should acknowledge that and be supportive. Can I touch on a little bit about risks? Now, these are reasonably generic risks, and I'll put them up here because they're applicable regardless of what organization, type of organization you're in. In other words, they cut across industry. Ones that are really common, we touched on a while ago around data privacy, because and that intersects with IP leakage, because quite often large language models, it's unclear about where the information has come from. So if a person inside your organization writes a report using a large language model and they publish it, they're not going to be confident about where the original source data came from. And that original source data may be a part of a lawsuit from a large language model and a major kind of content producer out there in the world. So being aware of that is really important. And then you get into things around data privacy, where an individual inside an organization may be trying to be entrepreneurial to get really rich information about a customer list, and they might pour all that customer information into a large language model, and that is putting private information into a large language model, and that is something that shouldn't be allowed. So this would all fall into responsible AI policies. IP leakage, so this comes back a little bit to, let's say, an example of if a person takes a company report, which might be confidential, and they put into a large language model to create their own summary report, they're going to be likely to be breaking a company policy unless it's a private large language model that a company has used. Brand damage and ethics, we've talked about this, whereby if a large language model creates information that's been hallucinated and that's published, and it's problematic in terms of it could be wrong, and that can cause a significant kind of brand damage, which we've all seen, I'm sure, in time. Security breaches, the cost of doing scaled attacks now, it's just going to be extremely cheap. So being aware of that, and again, educating your workforce around it. Skill shortages, everybody's going to struggle with this. They are struggling with this. There's a finite amount of AI experts, we'll say, in the world, and training people takes time. That is a reality. Putting in plans now to address that is important. Business model disruption. I believe that there's going to be major business model disruption across many industries. And lastly, something that sometimes organizations they're not aware of this yet, but sometimes they believe that large language models they're really being kind of creative, and they're not. They're actually just mimicking creativity. They're not reasoning. It's complete mimicry. And understanding that helps you make sure that you're able to use it to the best way possible for brainstorming and things like that. But make sure that you understand the subject matter, and the people that are using AI tools inside your organization, they have to understand the subject matter. Otherwise, you're unable to check the facts that are being come out from the system. So all this comes back to education. A lot of the conference talk today have been about the technology, so I'm purposefully steering away from technology today. I'm only going to touch on this briefly. So in regards to data assets, I said at the start that quite often there's a misconception that organizations need to sort out all of their data foundations in order to be able to get value from AI, and it simply isn't true. You need to have enough data, enough volume of data that is usable and relevant for the specific use cases you're going after. When you want to scale up, then it is important to have more data, depending on how broad your use case is going, but it is not a blocker to get going. And whilst you're doing prototyping and piloting, you can be sorting out your data foundations in parallel. But again, you don't need to sort out all of your data foundations, just specific ones that are pertinent to the use cases you're going after. And therefore, it does not need to be a blocker in order to drive scale. When it comes to architecture, beyond the scope of this conversation today, there are multiple different architecture patterns that can be used depending on the size of the company, the budgets available, the ambition, and the use cases. But the reality is that you do not need to unlock vast sums of money to make a difference and unlock value from AI. And whatever architectural pattern you go after today, you're going to be changing it. So building in flexibility from the outset and not locking into one specific technology ecosystem. That's what really matters, so that you can be agnostic to the hyperscalers that you're going to be using, and you're able to change as the whole landscape changes around you. When it comes down to operating models, I talked a little while about a while ago about buy versus build for platforms or companies. And these trade-offs will continue. It's worth having a very simple checklist in order to make decisions about what should you buy versus build. And at a really simple level, you should only be looking to build the things that truly differentiate your organization and literally buying the rest. And when it comes into data and AI governance, again, having transparency about what has happened, who has touched something in relation to data, becomes a part of your responsible AI framework, because there will be issues. And if you're having complete recording of everything that's happening and every prompt that's been put in, there's an understanding about where did that prompt cut in, what were the results come out. It allows you to have better feedback loops and full traceability the whole way down the line. And that's the beginning of responsible AI, is transparency and complete record of everything that's been done. There's a lot of information on this slide, so I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to touch on a few of the patterns. So 2023, 2024, a lot of the focus was on simple inputs and simple outputs using a GUI such as a chatbot, so ChatGPT itself. And I believe in 2025 that there'll be less of a demand around prompt engineering, because I think a lot of the enterprise applications such as Salesforce and things like that, they're just going to have essentially prompts baked into it. So there'll be less of a need to become really, really expert in prompt engineering. I believe agentic AI is going to be enormous this year and next year. And a lot of the focus in the last couple of years has been on large language models, which are by their very nature, they're general, they're generic essentially. They've hoovered up pretty much all the information that's freely available on the internet. Small language models, I believe, will be what really drives a lot of value this year. So that a small language model might be in different verticals, such as legal or healthcare or something like that. And when you begin to mix large language models and small language models, you get a lot more power. So I believe we'll see a lot more of that. And I think that hyper personalization is going to become the norm in every single industry. I think the expectations of what services are provided and how fast services are provided will dramatically increase. So that's the end of the talk, but I am going to just touch on a few things in the appendices as we have a couple of minutes left. And this, again, this is all about the practicalities from how you're moving from pilots to scaled adoptions. And I'm not going to talk to you all. This is more for a takeaway, essentially. So this is the use case scoring matrix, and allows anybody to very rapidly get a sense of how do you go, which use cases to go after, which ones are going to make a difference materially for an organization. Now, this use case scoring matrix can be obviously adjusted depending on industry and depending on context, but it gives you a starting point to make sure that there's an objective and consistent approach to ensure that you're continuously prioritizing which use cases to go after, rather than things that appear on the surface to be worth going after or following the crowd. It allows you to cut through a lot of noise. You can get through hundreds of use cases in a couple of hours and very quickly figure out what should you go after. And you weight this as well. So things like, difficulty of scaling is a part of the scoring. Now, corresponding to that, to the previous scoring matrix, this is a use case assessment criteria whereby you begin to really ask yourself difficult questions about what are you going after and why. So by applying different lenses in relation to scoring a use case, but also looking at the use case business value assessment, this is another way of looking at this, is almost a business case essentially. And by providing these templates to your teams, adjusting them slightly so they're relevant for your organization, but allows you to get better quality requests to go after use cases. So there's less synthesis and distillation that needs to be done, because you'll have higher quality information that's being provided to you in the first place. So I'm hoping that these tools will be quite useful for you all. And that is going to be the end of my talk. As I say, I'm Mark. I'm the co-founder and director of Amplify and Impact. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.